We are talking about the movie Killing Joan. Now this one is directed by Todd Bartoo, and this is actually his first feature-length movie. He also wrote this film, and it stars Jamie Bernadette, who I saw recently in the movie All Girls Weekend, which is known as Dark Mountain here in the UK. And this one's being released by Uncork'd Entertainment at the beginning of March. So what's the story? It's kind of like The Crow meets Patrick Swayze's Ghost. It's the best way I can describe it. It focuses on this character called Joan, played by Jamie Bernadette, who is a mob enforcer. She's basically a female thug for the mob, and she's going around kind of enforcing their will, and then the mob decides that she's a bit of a loose gun and she needs to be offed. And she comes back as a kind of a vengeful, supernatural creature, not really sure what she is actually going to be, we'll come on to it, and decides that she wants revenge from her former employers. And it was also going to become some type of like dark vigilante, a la The Crow, Spawn, that sort of thing. And even if you've seen kind of lower budget B movies, it's a little bit like Avenged. So that's your kind of plot here. So let's talk about the positives and negatives of Killing Joan. Obviously a low budget film, with all low budget films, you kind of can't really judge it on the same way that you would maybe judge obviously a blockbuster. So what does work, I've got to say, I really enjoyed the character of Frank, who is the crime boss, at least this first half of the movie. I thought he was probably the best actor on screen here, and he does quite charming and menacing at the same time. So I thought he was good and seemed quite competent as a kind of leader. Although on the cheaper side, I actually kind of quite like some of the shadowy effects here. It almost looks like you have touches of Cthulhu. You know, with kind of the tentacles coming out the darkness and stuff like that. It isn't the kind of cheap CGI side of it, but I still kind of liked it, to be honest with you. So that was actually pretty decent in some circumstances. It does look on the cheaper side, don't kid yourself. You know, and the kind of film does have kind of like lots of kind of action set pieces here, so you'll see plenty of kind of gun battles and fist fights and stuff like that. And yeah. So that's kind of pretty much what I can say in regards to stuff I liked. Let's talk about the negatives. Now, this is going to be a bit of a harsh one, I'm afraid, because I've got to say, Todd Bartoo, obviously first-time director, and I feel this shows, because there's a lot of inexperience on show here. We'll kind of go through it, but let's talk about the main thing for me is obviously the plot and the way this kind of story unfolds out. And there is problems abound here. So let's kind of go into it a little bit more detail. First and foremost, there's really flimsy reasons or no reasons for things happening. The reasons why Joan is killed by her employees in the first place seem superfluous to me. I mean, I just don't think, you know, a crime syndicate could just off its employees for no particular reason and expect it to function, basically. People just wouldn't work for them, you know. And I know this is what we've seen in mob films and stuff, but this one, there's simply no reason for it. So that was kind of, that kind of bothered me. There was literally no reason why she got killed. And then there's literally no reason why she's coming back as some kind of spirit. She just does. And the frustrating thing here is that at this point she's our protagonist, but she has no redeeming features as when she was alive. I mean, we see her the first 10-15 minutes of her basically, and she's just an asshole. She's just a mean killer who has no kind of remorse or redeeming features, but we're supposed to care about her when she's resurrected as a kind of avenging spirit. And I just don't see why she would be. Does that make sense? I think you would at least have to kind of like be a tortured soul, but that isn't represented on the film. So she's basically a merciless killer who comes back, and then because she was killed herself, decides she's going to be a good guy. So that basically makes her quite selfish in regards to she's only a good guy because it's affected her. Before that, she had no interest in kind of helping anyone other than herself. So that was kind of bad. Now, when she becomes a sort of a spirit, she just kind of like acclimatizes it straight away. And it's just ridiculous. There's no real kind of like shock or adjustment period. She just seems to pretty much get on with it, a little bit like startled. Oh my God, I seem to be some kind of supernatural entity. Kind of let's get revenge and stuff like that. So it's just ridiculous, and then people she just turns up, and they're like, oh, how did you get in the room? It's really silly. And what really shows the inexperience of the director here is some kind of like real cheesy touches. And this is a 2018 film. For example, we'll have a scene where, you know, Joan's character, or the character of Joan, will turn towards the camera and say something really, oh, I'm now going to get my revenge, and she'll kind of grimace in front of the camera, and there's no other characters around. So that's purely for dramatic effect, and you think, who are you doing that for? I mean, it's like a kid's show. So it's ridiculous. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, unfortunately. And then we kind of go, you know, I'm not going to go into every kind of like thing that this movie does which is silly, but there's a lot. And we kind of get a bunch of other kind of like supernatural situations kind of going on the end for reasons, because the desert is a dark place, apparently. It'll make sense sort of when you watch the movie. No real reasons for stuff happening. Everyone seems to be completely kind of like okay with the fact that there's supernatural stuff going on. So there's issues with the plot, but even small stuff. I mean, the way that kind of at the beginning of the movie, when she's still alive, to show, you know, what a badass she is. So they go to this club, and there seems to be about 3 people in there. Then someone goes, "Oh no, Joan's ex-boyfriend has just walked in with his new girlfriend," and they're literally this guy's standing behind her and hasn't noticed her, and she's literally the only other person in the club. Ridiculous. There seems to be no other people in this entire universe other than the criminals and the victims. That's it. Anyway, moving away from the plot. The acting, I've got to say, is really kind of cheesy. Jamie Bernadette I kind of liked when she was in All Girls Weekend, but here it's kind of quite painful to watch at times. Although I've got to be honest, I think this is coming from the direction necessarily rather than the acting. I think the lines are quite bad, the dialogue is bad, and then the direction, stuff like I've mentioned, turning towards the camera. So it makes the acting seem really kind of trite. Now I quite like the character of Frank. He's probably the only one really who comes across as a kind of a real person. Everyone else is just kind of a caricature. But I feel a lot of that is down not necessarily to the actors, but down to the writing, the dialogue, and obviously the direction that they were given, because it just doesn't seem realistic and stuff like that. The movie gets kind of a little bit convoluted towards the end as well. It's a fairly kind of straightforward plot, although it doesn't make sense, but it is straightforward until we get to the kind of the final act. Then we kind of get all other kind of like supernatural things revealing itself. And if you're still interested in the movie at this point, which I doubt many people will be, it ends up being a little convoluted and stuff like that. The effects, like I've mentioned, I kind of like them, to be honest, but she almost looks a bit like Nightcrawler when she kind of like disappears and reappears. That's kind of quite cool, but then we have some really horrible kind of like gunshot ADR and stuff like that, and you know, it's just a bit painful to watch this film, and I think obviously it comes down to the fact that this guy Todd is just inexperienced and cannot put together a film that is coherent ultimately. And it might make sense to him. I see this sometimes with filmmakers who are early on in their career, where it makes sense in their mind, and everyone who's involved in the story can kind of, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. But when you are watching it from an outside source, things just think, why would you do that? And that's why people have test screenings. But I feel maybe in the lower budget market that kind of doesn't happen. And obviously this is a good example of it, unfortunately. And it's just ultimately ends up being just a completely waste of time, if I'm honest. So I really don't recommend this film for most people. If you are really into kind of like kick-ass females, you know, female protagonists and stuff like that, even though I think her character is completely unlikable, you know, with a kind of a supernatural twist. If you really love The Crow and you just want something else to watch, then again, maybe check it out. But for most people, I have to say this film is not particularly entertaining, and will be frustrating to a lot of people. So I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 10, I'm sorry to say. So I found it quite a frustrating film. So have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.